Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey Wednesday signed the nation's most restrictive ban on abortion into law. The bill, which faces immediate court challenge, makes no exception for cases of rape or incest. It was approved Tuesday by Alabama's Senate with the support of 25 Republicans, all of them white men. Under the Alabama law, doctors could face up to 99 years in prison for performing abortions, decades longer than prison sentences typically given to rapists. Even far-right Christian evangelical leader Pat Robertson called the bill extreme, saying, quote, "It goes too far." Meanwhile, Missouri's Republican-led Senate passed a bill early today banning abortions at 8 weeks of pregnancy. The legislation now heads to the Republican-led Missouri House of Representatives. Republican Governor Mike Parson has promised to sign the bill into law. Architects behind the bills in Alabama, Missouri, and other states say they're aimed at overturning Roe v. Wade, the landmark 1973 Supreme Court ruling that recognizes the constitutional right to an abortion. President Trump declared a national emergency Wednesday over what he called threats to American technology, barring U.S. telecoms from installing foreign-made equipment. The move appears to be aimed at punishing Huawei, the Chinese maker of telecommunications gear and consumer electronics. It's the latest escalation of the U.S. trade war with China after Trump followed through last week on the threat to hike tariffs on $200 billion of Chinese imports. Meanwhile, the White House has delayed plans to place tariffs of up to 25% on imported cars and auto parts. This comes as Canada's trade minister has left Washington, D.C. without an agreement on lifting U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin has said the U.S. won't ratify a successor to NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, until Canada and Mexico reach an agreement to end tariffs. President Trump set to unveil a sweeping immigration plan today that would prioritize high-skilled workers and English speakers while further cutting the number of immigrants granted asylum or allowed to reunify with family members living in the U.S. The plan would cap immigration rates at their current levels, changing the percentage of those receiving green cards based on a so-called merit system from 12 to 57%. It could even require immigrants hoping to enter the U.S. to pass a civics test. Trump is set to announce the plan, which was crafted by his son-in-law, his senior advisor Jared Kushner, at a ceremony today at the White House Rose Garden. Meanwhile, Guatemala's U.S. consul says a 2.5-year-old migrant boy died in U.S. custody Wednesday, 3 days after he and his family were detained by Customs and Border Protection. He's believed to be the fourth migrant child to die in U.S. custody since December. The White House says it won't need a request by the House Judiciary Committee to turn over documents in a sweeping investigation into whether President Trump obstructed justice. In a letter to House Judiciary Chair Gerald Nadler, White House counsel Pat Cipollone accused Democrats of attempting a do-over of special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation of Trump. Congressmember Nadler accused Cipollone of, quote, claiming that the president is a king. He said he was considering holding Trump administration officials who refused to testify in contempt and may levy very large fines against anyone defying a congressional subpoena. In Paris, the leaders of France and New Zealand Wednesday unveiled an agreement to combat online extremism. The so-called Christchurch Call is named after the New Zealand city where in March a white supremacist gunman killed 51 worshippers at 2 mosques and live-streamed the massacre on Facebook. This is New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern.
The social media dimension to the attack was unprecedented. And our response today with the adoption of the Christchurch Call is equally unprecedented as well. Never before have countries and tech companies come together in the wake of an horrific attack to commit to an action plan that will deliver collaboratively work and new technology built to make our communities ultimately safer.
So far, the Christchurch Call has the support of 16 countries, the European Commission, and 8 tech giants. But the Trump administration said Wednesday it, quote, is not currently in a position to join the endorsement. The White House cited concerns the agreement could violate First Amendment. In a New York Times opinion piece last weekend, Prime Minister Ardern wrote she supports free speech rights, but that, quote, that right does not include the freedom to broadcast mass murder. In Yemen, at least 6 civilians were killed and dozens more wounded today as U.S.-backed Saudi-led coalition warplanes bombed residential areas of Yemen's capital, Sana'a. The violence came as Houthi rebels and Saudi-backed forces clashed in the port city of Hodeidah, threatening to unravel a ceasefire and a planned pullout from the city by Houthi forces. In Sudan's capital, Khartoum, government troops opened fire on pro-democracy protesters Wednesday with live ammunition, wounding at least 14 people. The violence came just days after at least 6 protesters and 1 soldier were killed at a similar protest. After the latest shootings, the head of Sudan's ruling military council said he'd suspended talks with pro-democracy demonstrators for 3 days, accusing them of failing to de-escalate tensions. Demonstrators have been demanding a transfer from military to civilian rule following last month's military coup that ousted longtime leader Omar al-Bashir. In the Gaza Strip, Israeli troops opened fire on Palestinian protesters Wednesday with live ammunition and chemical agents, injuring at least 65 people. The protesters were marking the 71st anniversary of the Nakba, or catastrophe, when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forcibly expelled from their homes after the State of Israel was formed. 1 protester was left in serious condition yesterday and 16 injured by gunfire. Others were treated for gas inhalation from tear gas and skunk spray, a chemical concoction that smells like corpses and feces. Trump administration officials said Wednesday photographs showing Iranian boats equipped with missiles were the cause of the recent escalation between the U.S. and Iran, claiming they were evidence that Iranian paramilitaries in the Persian Gulf were preparing to target U.S. naval vessels. The New York Times cited 3 unnamed officials who made the claim, which widely contradicts other officials, including Europeans, Iraqis, members of both parties in Congress, and some Trump administration officials who reportedly said the missiles are likely defensive weapons. This comes just 2 days after the top British general in the U.S.-led coalition against ISIS said there is no increased threat from Iranian-backed forces in Iran or Syria. Major General Christopher Ghika was speaking via video link from Baghdad during a Pentagon news conference.
No, there's been no increased threat from Iranian-backed forces in Iraq and Syria. We're aware of their presence, clearly, and we monitor them along with a whole range of others because that's the environment we're in.
Just hours after General Chris Ghika made those comments, U.S. Central Command disputed them in a statement. The U.S. Department of Transportation has ordered a halt to all passenger and cargo flights in and out of Venezuela in the latest move by the Trump administration to ratchet up pressure on President Nicolas Maduro as it backs efforts by opposition groups to stage a coup d'etat. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., civil rights leader Reverend Jesse Jackson successfully passed through police lines Wednesday to drop off food and water to 4 activists who remain inside Venezuela's embassy building at the invitation of Venezuela's government in order to prevent it from being taken over by Venezuela's U.S.-backed opposition. Last week, authorities cut off water and electricity to the embassy. To see our coverage of the occupation and protest at the embassy, visit our website, democracynow.org. In climate news, temperatures near the entrance to the Arctic Ocean in northwest Russia reached a record-shattering 84 degrees Fahrenheit over the weekend, in an area where high temperatures are normally 30 degrees cooler this time of year. This comes as the National Snow and Ice Data Center recorded a record low sea ice extent for the Arctic Ocean in April, noting almost all of the sea ice, more than 4 years old, is gone. Over the weekend, meteorologists measured carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere at over 415 parts per million, the highest level in human history, and a concentration that's not been seen on Earth in over 3 million years. California fire investigators said Wednesday the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, PG&E, was to blame for last year's Camp Fire, the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in California's history, which left 85 people dead and scorched more than 150,000 acres. Investigators concluded the fire began after PG&E electrical transmission lines ignited dry vegetation in at least 2 spots. In a statement, PG&E said it accepted the determination. California has seen increasingly deadly blazes in recent years as climate change drives higher temperatures, extreme droughts, and severe weather that make wildfires far more destructive. In New York City, the American Museum of Natural History and the Metropolitan Museum of Art both said Wednesday they'll stop accepting donations from the Sacklers, the billionaire family that owns Purdue Pharma, maker of OxyContin, the highly addictive drug at the center of the opioid epidemic. Other cultural institutions, including the Guggenheim and London's Tate Modern Museum, have also severed ties with the Sacklers. President Trump has pardoned former Canadian press baron Conrad Black, a longtime political ally and former business partner who in 2007 was found guilty of fraud and obstruction of justice. Black, who Donald Trump has described as a friend, wrote a glowing book about the president last year titled Donald J. Trump, A President Like No Other. Black was convicted for fleecing millions of dollars from shareholders of his company Hollinger International. His media empire included the Daily Telegraph in London, the Chicago Sun-Times, the Jerusalem Post, National Post in Canada, and 400 other newspapers. And New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio is running for president, joining a crowded field of 24 contenders for the Democratic nomination. De Blasio kicked off his campaign today with a video highlighting his experience as mayor of New York, promising to fight for working families, combat climate change, and take on Donald Trump.
I will take on the wealthy. I will take on the big corporations. I will not rest until this government serves working people. As mayor of the largest city in America, I've done just that.
De Blasio for president, guys.
Donald Trump must be stopped. I've beaten him before, and I will do it again.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.